It's an honor to be at Time Machine again. I want to welcome Dr. Roper to Time Machine and to Austin. I know he has been to Central Texas a few times before, including a visit to that little event called South by Southwest in 2017, where he did a featured session with Wired editor-in-chief Nicholas Thompson. At that point, Dr. Roper served as the founding director of the Pentagon's Strategic Capabilities Office, so a slightly different role than he has now. Incidentally, if you're interested in learning more about what he talked about in 2017, there is an hour-long video on the South by Southwest YouTube channel that you can look at. It's pretty fascinating. All that said, Dr. Roper is an example of kind of a new thinking, a new approach in the military that has a startup-focused mentality, fast, innovative. We'll start with the AI focus, which is certainly the theme of Time Machine. Dr. Roper, the Air Force released its Artificial Intelligence Strategy Manifesto, for lack of a better term, on September 12th, highlighting the importance of AI capabilities to 21st century missions. Tell us more about this September 12th announcement, and more specifically, can the military do AI?
I hope so, Hugh, and I appreciate you hosting today and moderating. We'll just have a fun conversation, hopefully entertain the crowd and
absolutely
stay on the clock. The Air Force and the Pentagon as a whole loves to write strategies that it doesn't follow. I rarely read them because they're more aspirational, but for once, I actually see within the Air Force the goodwill and energy to make AI real. And shame on us if we don't, because you can't spell Air Force without AI. It's the first two letters, so you should try to make it real across the force. Here's why we've been pretenders in AI for years. We have done AI glitter across the force, where we demonstrate an instantiation of AI. We took some data from someplace and showed that if you ran machine learning on top of it, that you could produce useful information for operators. Well, we know that's going to be the case. We have it in our personal lives. So that makes for great pictures, it makes for great presentations, but it doesn't actually provide war-winning capability to our operators. And the reason why is we're not a digital force. We don't have the digital plumbing across the Air Force to let any of the companies here, the researchers here, the principal investigators here, be able to do any meaningful AI for the military. We did not have enterprise cloud across the Air Force. We did not have our data in a central repository where researchers could get access to it. So if you were a company and you came to us and said, hey, I want to do AI for the Air Force, there was no way to plug you in meaningfully. So thankfully, the Air Force has now put serious dollars, billions of dollars, into digitally transforming. So enterprise-wide cloud, we just awarded in a big program called Cloud One, which is pulling data from programs you may know, like F-16, F-22, our B-21 bomber, all of them into a central place. One, just because we need to write software quickly for those programs, but what we hope the offshoot will be is once that data is discoverable, that app developers and microservice developers will be able to produce new and useful capabilities for the military, and we need a different business model to work with companies that work in that kind of space. So if we stick with our digital transformation, then I think we will finally open the door for AI at scale and scope, and not just do AI glitter across the force.
And previous to that September 12th announcement or release, your perspective is it was AI glitter, or was there no coherent or cogent policy, or how did that work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be too pejorative on the Pentagon, because I remember 5 years ago doing the first briefing with senior leadership on what machine learning was, on what deep learning was, and why it was different than the automatic target recognition attempts of the past. Right, this has come up every decade in the Pentagon. Algorithms should be able to take images and identify things in them, and it's never worked. And everyone here knows better than the Pentagon why it now works today, with the amount of data that we have available and huge processing being cheap and ubiquitous, can finally chew through the data and build those deep convolutional neural nets. So I remember doing that and pitching the idea to the Pentagon that we should start a program called Maven, that we would work with an internet provider that ended up being Google, and having blank stares across the room because it was so new. And now everyone in the Pentagon knows what AI and machine learning is, but we have so very little of it. in the force today. So what I think you're finally seeing is a recognition that you can't jump to the end state, right? Google did not become an AI company overnight. They explained very eloquently to me that they created cloud because they needed to update their search engines fast enough. It wasn't driven by an imperative to get to machine learning. Cloud was driven by an imperative to get to faster software coding and faster deployment. But then the byproduct of having all of that centralized processing and compute was having the data in a way that it was discoverable and usable in ways that had never been achieved before. And with massive processing and compute and the ability to churn through those deep convolutional neural nets, finally opened up the door to what the Pentagon has looked at decade after decade. But we're behind the power curve in applying. In fact, the only operational AI that I have today in the Air Force is in our maintenance fleets. So we have predictive maintenance across airplanes that tell us when parts are going to fail ahead of time. It's hugely valuable because if a part breaks on an airplane, that airplane's not flying, and an airplane it's not flying. It's of very little use to the Air Force. But that's it. We've got to do much more than that, and pulling AI into the war-fighting side of the force is going to be significantly harder. And so we can't rest on our laurels or be happy that we now have an enterprise-wide cloud. We have got to be just as fervent and focused on taking the next step.
For civilians such as myself, give us a little more context on how DoD works as a unified force. More particularly, does the Air Force have a different perspective on AI than the Navy or the Army or other branches of the military? And how do you work together or not? Or just give us more context there.
No, I learn about the Joint Force every day, so just know I'm a student as much as anyone. But it appears to me, having done this a few years, that the Joint Force is created to fight jointly, but it's not engineered jointly. We have a terrible time getting data from systems passed around to other systems or even to the users who need them. And all of us in our personal lives, feel massively connected to anything and everywhere. So imagine coming into the military and you have this massive ability to touch the world through your personal devices. And then we put you in military systems where you're stovepiped away from the rest of the Joint Force. So to give you a little insight into how Washington politics works, it is hard to keep funding for something that's not easily photographable. When you can take a picture of a ship or an airplane or a tank, that is built in someone's district. It employs people across the country. That makes that program easier to sell on the Hill. Digital transformation and the money that's going to be required to do it, it's harder to photograph. And so we have been hesitant to go all in on digitally transforming. And what I'm excited that the Air Force is doing is we're putting significant funding at risk, by the way, to digitally transform the whole Air Force so that if any Air Force sensor ever sees something, that data can go to the entire Joint Force. And so in a program that we call Advanced Battle Management System, which is not a very good name, but we've never been good at good names in the Pentagon, we envision that the future force will be like having some equivalent of the app Waze everywhere. And it'll be different depending on whether you're in a ship or in the cockpit of an airplane or commanding a satellite, or if you're a soldier or Marine on the ground. But the idea would be that we have a sense of what you need as a user, what your mission is, and we're pushing data to you that we think will help you engage in that mission. And as you give feedback, we get better at pushing better data to you. And so we all know how that works as we drive around. It's easy to imagine how that might work on the battlefield, but we've never paid for the plumbing to do it. So it's all been a vision without the fiscal reality to do it.
Somewhat of that same question about the various branches of the military working together, but from a slightly different approach. In your mind, in your view, in your experience, does the military take a fundamentally different viewpoint of AI than companies that are working on this technology from a consumer and or civilian perspective?
We do, in that we're not expert. I mean, shame on us that we haven't flight followed commercial Internet of Things applications of AI because we don't have the digital infrastructure to do them. So the most likely first ethic of AI in the military would be simply having machine learning, computer vision capabilities so that we're not having operators look at screens 24/7. So that should be fairly easy and straightforward to do, because if the AI is introducing objects of interest to a user, that's saving time and making us more efficient. I think we will get to that. The harder epic of AI is going to be getting it into cockpits and satellites and ships, places where the mission depends, where safety depends on that AI working well. And we started an AI accelerator at MIT, a long-term partnership on the next generation of AI, and those researchers make it really clear how fragile AI is in the face of an adversary. And of course, in a military context, we have to bring an adversary into the equation. And so if we want to get AI into the cockpit of a fighter and build an R2-D2 for real, then we're going to need to know, how do you break R2-D2, and then how do you robust against whatever that break is, and back and forth until you find some level of confidence that your AI is going to work as you intend. And so the fragility that we see right now tells me that we're not going to have fully AI-only Air Force in future, that we're going to have people engaging with it, and that's an area of research that we need to be actively engaged in, because we're going to need AI in the face of an adversary before the commercial Internet of Things world does. So we need to be pumping our research dollars into that.
I love that you bring R2-D2 into the question or the equation. And we talked a little bit about this in the green room. Give us more perspective on how much inspiration the military takes from popular culture, from movies, from video games, and vice versa. Is what we see on screen similar to what's happening?
I think we take a ton of inspiration from it. I mean, I think sci-fi writers, journalists, and artists in general that are tech savvy are very good at looking at where the current landscape of tech is and imagining the next thing. And in my last job, when I worked for the Secretary of Defense, running a kind of a shadow weapons development outfit, because the bureaucracy was so slow and it didn't act like a tech startup, we were working on massive swarms of micro drones secretively, but then going home and watching online advertisement for Call of Duty where micro drones were flying on the screen. And so it was kind of cool to think that what someone developing a video game thought was possible was actually being done in the military. And eventually we demonstrated that on 60 Minutes. So I think we draw huge inspiration from science fiction. I think the one area that we haven't caught up and we're way behind on is flying cars. The Jetsons showed that they would be awesome, and we still don't have them. But I think that's a rare exception. I think in general, it's spot on for what the future can be.
So speaking of pop culture, a few days ago, you were in San Francisco in the Bay Area for the first ever Air Force Space Pitch Days, which kind of sounds a lot like Shark Tank.
It is a Shark Tank.
Tell us more about the thinking that inspired this event and some of the outcomes you expect from this pitch event.
Sure. If you are a startup company here and you have tried to work with the Air Force in the past, I'm just here to apologize. I'm very sorry that the defense weapons buying system treats startups the same way that we do a defense prime. We do not have to, and it's indicative of that Cold War mindset that being a small, agile company means you can only have a small contribution to national security. Completely false, right? Small companies that grow up to become bigger companies are changing the world, and the Pentagon had better wake up and work with them differently. So pitch days are our way of working very differently with startups. You do not have to deal with the morass of bureaucracy that procurement and defense will heap on you. You just simply have to come to an event where we have people like me that acquire systems, we have operators who use them, we have technologists who know tech, and you pitch your idea to us, we give you 10 minutes, we'll kind of debate and ask questions for 5 minutes, really try to drill into your concept to see if it's viable. And then after 5 minutes of deliberation, we will put you on contract and pay you 15 minutes after the deliberation's done. So that's a 30-minute process to getting money in your account. And
that's a little faster than typical military processes, yes?
I think the fastest before them was about 3 months, and that would be like a high five moment in the military, like, we're fast, 3 months, high five, And that's simply too slow. And what we want companies to think, we do not want to make you defense companies. Heaven forbid, that 20th century model is not going to work. We just want companies that can solve military problems to have easy access to our market and to benefit from it. So in the Air Force alone, I have $1 billion a year that is fenced to work with tech startups and scale-ups with very low return on investment expectations, and I don't own equity. My money doesn't dilute. So the fact that we have not intended something great from this is just plain insane. So our ambitions are to start making unicorns that get their early funding off of defense funds, and as they grow up and become amazing companies that make the world a better place, we hope that they'll feel connected to national security in the Air Force and just help us keep the technologies that are making the world awesome to make sure that they're not misused to make the world a place that we wouldn't want to live.
Absolutely. We've got a few minutes left, and this has certainly been a theme of what you've talked about today, but just drill down a little more on this. You're trying to bring this startup, move fast, break things, fail quickly approach to one of the longest legacy systems in the US. What's the logistic approach to that? What's the pragmatic approach to that? How do you convince people who are relatively entrenched in this system that this is the right way to go? And particularly for people in the audience who maybe work at larger businesses that are trying to adopt more of a startup type approach.
I had a lot of people speculate as to how much innovation can you bring into a 51,000 person organization. Your inspiration's all around. It's in commercial companies and tech companies. The government loves to focus on process and organization, and commercial companies rarely do. They focus on culture and values and mission. We certainly have mission and values. What we were missing was culture. And so we have brought in things that you really probably wouldn't have seen in the government in the past. We've started allowing organizations to name themselves, and they usually pick sci-fi names like Kessel Run or Kobayashi Maru if you're a Star Trek or a Star Wars fan, which is a big departure from the past. We're delegating authority. So I've delegated authority that used to reside at my level is now down at a lieutenant colonel or a colonel level. That's 5 different levels of delegation, just getting power out of Washington in the hands of people who work and innovate for a living. And then finally, actually rewarding people who take risk and it doesn't work out, which was the big bullshit stance Washington has kept forever. I got those memos on taking risk as an early engineer in defense, and I didn't believe them. We only rewarded the people who took risk, but it worked out for them. We have to start rewarding people who take smart risk and it doesn't. And if they believe they have that top cover and you're empowered to go do things, then great people do great things if they're planted in the right environment. And shame on us that we didn't do that in the government. So now we are, and we're seeing the same effect that happens in great tech companies that empower their people to go innovate. Just happens naturally.
Wonderful. Dr. Roper, thank you for coming to Austin, participating in Time Machine 2019. Keep innovating at the military. We're excited about all the AI implementation that you're working on. We are also excited to see your next version of SOX when you come and speak next year. Thank you so much.
Thanks, you.